how many combat effective Marines do we have? Like, how many guys can like actually fight at this point? And we'd started the day with 46 guys. Like, that was the number. That was the platoon roster. And we had everybody on the roster that morning. And he goes back to count. He comes back up. He's like, I got the number. It was 21. And you know, like, a lot of those guys, like, you know, came back, were returned, fleshed and banded up. They were fine. But I just remember being like, Jesus Christ, like, that was a bad day.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. On this episode, we hear the combat story of Elliot Ackerman, leading Marines in conventional and MARSOC units, including his experience as a platoon leader in arguably the hardest fighting in the post-9/11 era in Fallujah II, for which he was awarded the Silver Star. Elliot deployed 5 times over 8 years. He's gone on to write 4 books and has written for and been interviewed by many news outlets and magazines. Enjoy. We're here with Elliot Ackerman. Appreciate you taking the time to spend with us, talk about some of your experiences in Iraq, Afghanistan, and after leaving the Marine Corps. I wanted to start out, if you don't mind, if you could just kind of share with us briefly some of the deployments you were on, where you were and when, because I think it's important as we talk about Fallujah, since there's kind of 2 of the big battles there.
Sure. As a Marine, I came in the Marine Corps in June of 2003, did all my training in Quantico, and then went on my first deployment in June of 2004, which was to Iraq and Al-Anbar province. Came back from that deployment in February 2005. Then the next sort of small deployment I did was when Hurricane Katrina hit in the summer of 2005. My infantry battalion was sent down there for about a month. We came back from that and did a deployment in 2006, June to December of 2006 with the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit. And the biggest thing that happened on that deployment was we wound up, when Israel invaded Lebanon, we wound up evacuating all the Americans out of Lebanon. So I came back from that. Then in early 2007, moved over to Marine Special Operations Command, to what is now 2nd Raider Battalion, and then did a deployment with them from March of 2008 to October 2008 to Afghanistan, mostly in RC West in Afghanistan. I was a team leader there, and our team was partnered with the 207th Afghan Commandos.
Okay. So what I wanted to do, having that brief synopsis of the places you were and those different times, several deployments into these different combat theaters and non-combat theaters, is to take a step back to kind of your family, because reading about you, a father who was in finance, I think, a mother who's a journalist, novelist, writer, brother who's a mathematician, I think. How did you become a Marine out of that?
I think something that was important for me was I grew up abroad. So I was born in Los Angeles, and I moved to London when I was 9 years old and lived there till I was 15. And I think having that experience kind of gave me a certain appreciation for just what it means to be an American. It just gave me a little bit of perspective. That combined with the fact that I always had this like inherent interest in the military, sort of led me into the Corps. And I think it, fundamentally, I consider myself a fortunate son of this country. I came from a great family, got to go to good schools, had every advantage and opportunity that I could imagine being provided. And so, at a simple level, I just sort of felt like I wanted to give something back, and the military seemed like a great place to do it. I couldn't see anywhere else where at 23, I could have that much responsibility and do something where I felt like it really mattered. And so, so the sort of amalgamation of all of those ideas is what drove me into the Marine Corps. And I came in 1998, so it was pre-9/11, but, over the course of time that I was at college, things became very, very real.
So you did ROTC?
ROTC.
Navy ROTC?
Navy ROTC at Tufts. So it was a Marine option.
Okay. So, if you can, what was your family's reaction when they saw you going into the military? Or maybe there's family history there?
Well, my father had been in the New Jersey National Guard as a typist clerk.
Okay.
So, and he would always joke about his military service, that he didn't do much of anything. And, but, the story that's famous in my family was I originally kind of had this idea that maybe I wanted to fly. And so I was not someone you would have thought would have gone to the military. I was sort of like a low B student. I was a skater punk, a little doughy, never played many sports, really up until my junior year in high school. And then sort of my junior year towards the end, sort of something flipped, and I kind of had this epiphany that, you're going to have to become the person you want to be. Like, I sort of had this sense of, all right, Elliot, like childhood's over. Now we're writing in ink, not in pencil, and if you want to be a person you can be proud of, you got to start doing the things now that you want to, that are going to take you there. So I remember one night we were at the dinner table, and my mother was like sifting through the day's mail, and it was sort of that time you're a rising senior in high school, sort of spring of your junior year, and she was going through all the mailers I was getting from different colleges, Purdue, University of Michigan, whatever it was, saying interested, throwing a lot of them in the trash. I wasn't interested in them, and one came in from the Air Force Academy, and she said, all right, Elliot, one from the Air Force came in. I said, hold on to that one. And she sort of did like a double kick and sort of like, okay. And she'll tell me that was the first time she sort of thought, what's going on here. But my mother in particular had a lot of trepidation about it. I think my father got it. Even though he had never been in the military, he understood the sort of underlying impulse of a young person wanting to go to a place where they felt they could, prove themselves and have a big experience. And so, all through my senior year, I went from having never played a sport to lettering in 3 varsity sports my senior year. I went from being able to do like 3 push-ups, no pull-ups, and maybe like 10 sit-ups to maxing out the physical tests by the next spring. So I really basically just got my act together because I really felt this was what I wanted to do. I was sort of to use the words of Gunnery Sergeant Hartman and Full Metal Jacket, Ackerman, you're born again hard. So I sort of got born again hard over the summer of my junior year into my senior year. And then when it was all done, I'd applied for schools. The top 2 that I got into were Tufts and the Naval Academy. And my mother still talks about the night where I sort of had to make the decision. I told her, okay, I'm going to go out, take a walk, and decide where I want to go. And my dad says, she did not sleep that night. She was so worried. You were going to go to the Naval Academy. And I decided to go to Tufts really because I knew I wasn't an engineer. I knew I would be going against the grain of my personality, trying to take all these engineering classes. And no one at the academy could guarantee you'd become a Marine. Yeah. You do service selection at the end of your during your junior year, and who knows, you can wind up as a surface warfare officer on a Navy ship, which I knew I didn't want to do. Yeah. And through ROTC, I could be guaranteed at least that I would be a Marine. You didn't know what your MOS would be, but I knew I'd be a Marine. So I decided to go to Tufts, and it was I would say the first mature decision I made in my life because the Naval Academy, it's very romantic, it's very alluring, but I went to Tufts instead. And I think with parents, all parents sort of take this journey, and I look at my mother in particular. I remember after I'd been at Tufts for about a year and I was an ROTC midshipman, you had the opportunity to do summer training every year. I'm sure you had the same experience in Army ROTC. And one of the competitive summer trainings you could go up for was you could go to the Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport, with a real live Marine infantry battalion. They would just attach one midshipman to each company in the battalion. But it was competitive, so you had to, take PT tests, and the Marine officer instructor in charge of all the Marine options in the ROTC detachment would decide who was the one name he'd put forward. And so I worked my butt off to be the one that would get a go, and I finally got the slot, and I called home, and I was so excited about it. And I was like, Mom, guess what? I'm gonna get to go to the Mountain Warfare Training Center this summer. And she said, what are you gonna learn to do there? I said, fight in the mountains. And she cried. So I was 19.
Because this is 99.
Yeah, it was 1999.
Yeah.
But I look at the journey she took from that point where she's crying, to the end of my career. I was, going in and out of Afghanistan, Iraq. Yeah. Working in special operations, and and her being, proud and understanding it. So, so the one thing that never, I knew it academically. I'll still often say, I never understood war until I had my kids, because, I'll unpack that on a lot of levels. Yeah. I never understood war till I had my kids because, first of all, I think war it's not like these wars that have gone like in Afghanistan, we're still fighting. Like they're not, or in Syria, like they're not fueled by ideology. I mean, they start because of ideology, people's ideas, but like these wars that just grind on and on and on. Like they're fueled because of loss, I think. And so I imagine, being someone who's fighting for the Free Syrian Army, let's say, and you're fighting against Bashar al-Assad's regime, and you're someone maybe like me, and I have a 7-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son, and if something happened to one of my kids, the regime airstrike killed my kids, and I was a rebel, like that's it. I would be lost from this world. I would take my gun, I would go up in the mountains, and I would kill as many of them as I could until they killed me. That's it. I mean, there's sort of no rehabilitating that loss. So I say I didn't understand. I never understood that until I had my own kids. And I would see things that were tough. I would see kids in tough spots. And I would register with me like, man, that's really sad. That's upsetting. I wish we could do something. But not even close to the way it registers with me now, where I see like the face of my own kid on those kids. Yeah. So I feel like I never really understood until I had kids. And then I never really understood what my parents were going through, how helpless they felt, or anyone who loved you. Because, at least when you're deployed, when you're outside the wire and when you're doing something dangerous. Then when you're like, in Bagram and it's salsa night and you're fine and nothing's going to happen to you and you can totally relax. I mean, that you're going. Your family never knows. Like they just know you're over there and they hope you're okay, but they don't have the ability to just ever really relax. And again, I sort of knew that academically, but it was something that really dawned on me when I had kids. And the last point I'd make on that is like I deployed many, many times, particularly with like, more senior staff NCOs who I knew had kids, or even more junior Marines who had families and had kids. And I knew they had kids. I knew about their kids. I knew their wives. I met their kids. But now I look back and I'm like, Jesus Christ. Like, what was it like for, Master Sergeant so-and-so or Staff Sergeant so-and-so with like his 3 kids at home he has not seen in 8 months, 10 months. And what's it like for him? Like when we're in a super crazy gnarly firefight and he's got to get up and run over there to go get Schmuckatelli the ammo or call in a medevac. And my calculation when I'm like 24 years old is, hey, listen, I get up, I run over there, I want to do what's right, I don't want to die. But if I die, I'm young, I leave behind my parents who will be sad, but that's sort of it. And these guys, it's like their whole family, your kid. And again, I might sound like an idiot saying this now, but like I didn't get it.
No,
I didn't. I mean, and how can you?
I got to say, so one of the guys I interviewed, JT Snow, who's a pilot who I flew with. When I interviewed him, this is 9 years after Afghanistan. He is in the unfortunate position where his son was on the ground in Mosul in the past 2 years in the infantry, literally clearing streets that he had flown over himself 13 years ago. So he was explaining how he was on the other side of this, and this guy is one of the toughest soldiers I've ever met. And he was saying, being the family member at home, there's nothing worse than that. Nothing.
Sure.
Knowing your kid is out there on the front lines. And so I might ask, when throughout those deployments, then you didn't have children when you had deployed?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So that.
Not while I was in the Marines.
Right. So you're looking at it from an optic at the time of. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that makes sense. And when I deployed to Afghanistan, I had a 6-month-old son, and I think that really affected me as I went in to different situations. And I think it just weighs on you. It helps you appreciate soldiers who have that. But mine was 6 months old. I can't imagine like trying to put a kid through high school while you're trying to deal with everything that goes into a deployment. I think it only gets harder. Yeah,
it only gets harder. And, and not just the physical safety of your deployment, but, what you're missing too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So one thing I wanted to jump back to, it sounds like initially you kind of put the Air Force Academy application to the side, but then after that it was all Marines.
Yeah.
So where did that kind of fork in the road happen where you just saw that's where you wanted to go?
I saw the uniforms.
That was it?
No. I remember, I think what kind of first got the Marine Corps in my head was I was visiting the Naval Academy, and I was like, I think like my beginning of my senior year of high school. And I was talking to some like midshipmen about service selection, and these two guys, I remember we were like in their mess hall, we're saying, well, we're going to go in the Marine Corps because we both want to be pilots, but at least if like we were to wash out of flight school or something, we don't get stuck being SWOs, like we get to be Marines. And I mean, even though I know that's like not really how it works, it really got me thinking about like the Marine Corps. And so the more I learned just, the culture, the ethos of the organization just made a lot of sense to me. And I started thinking, really thinking more that, I didn't necessarily want to be a pilot. I thought I wanted to be on the ground. I liked the idea of being a platoon commander. And so when I was thinking of like, where does one go if you want to be in the infantry? You might disagree with this, but I was as an Army guy, I was like, the Marine Corps is the infantry. Every Marine a rifleman, every Marine platoon commander, rifle platoon commander. It's sort of the, everyone is sitting there worshiping and bowing down at the altar of the infantry. So it seemed like the right fit for me.
Mm-hmm. And then throughout your ROTC time, I think with the Marines, if I understand this correctly, once you get commissioned, everybody goes to the same training program, and then you're able to select your branch within the Marines.
Yes, so they have, they have an interesting process called the quality spread when you go through the basic school. So in the old days, they used to do it where you would have your class ranking, and they would have the MOS assignment day. And so let's say there were 90 guys in the class. Mm-hmm. The first guy would walk in and be like infantry, and he'd take the infantry slot. And tanks, they'd go down, and the number 90th guy would get, whatever it was, aircraft systems maintenance comptroller, right. Horrible MOS. And what they realized was, the thing is that we're not getting the best guys, and all of the best guys are going to the more romantic and sexy MOSs, and those are getting the worst guys in the class. So they started this thing they still have called the quality spread. So they would take the class on MOS assignment day, and they would freeze the class based off class ranking, and they'd break you into thirds. So the first guy goes in and picks, but then the number 2 guy doesn't go and pick. The number 30 guy goes and picks, the number 60 guy, then the number 2 guy, then 31, then 62. So if you're, number 29 in your class, you're sort of shit out of luck. Yeah. So, but that's where you would get your MOS assignment, and then you get MOS assigned, and then you go to whatever your MOS school is. And so I was assigned an infantry officer. Was lucky, got what I wanted, and then went to the infantry officer course.
Okay. So then fast forwarding to your time in Iraq. So after you've come out of training in 2003, it sounds like.
April 2004, I graduated from the infantry officer course.
Okay, so then you're right into Iraq.
Yeah, it was like a very interesting time to be in Quantico, because I showed up in June of 2003, and the vibe in Quantico amongst like the captains who were our instructors was sort of like, hey guys, you missed the war. Yeah. So did we. It's over. Baghdad has fallen. So we'll have to get back down to training, and that was really that was the sense all through that summer. And then I remember very clearly August of that year, the front page of the Marine Corps Times, and we're coming back in from some field exercise, and the front page was Marines back to Iraq, and everyone was like, what are we going to do there? We're Marines, we're shock troops, that's occupation duty, let the Army do that. Yeah. It was Marines back to Iraq, and so there were these rumors that we were going back. And the kind of senior first lieutenants, young captains, guys who'd been in the invasion were trickling into the basic school as instructors at that point. So suddenly we had these sort of newly minted combat veterans coming back who'd all been in the invasion. And then as that went on, I actually remember you get your MOS assigned, but then you get assigned your infantry battalion. And so and everyone in my class wanted 2 things. They wanted to go to Iraq, because you just wanted to do something that felt real, even though the war didn't seem like it was much of anything. It was occupation duty, was how we were talking about it. And everyone kind of wanted to be on the West Coast living in San Diego. No one wanted to be in Camp Lejeune and Camp Swampy in Jacksonville. And so I originally got orders to 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, which is based out of San Diego. I was like, all right, awesome. Yeah. But they weren't going to Iraq. They were going on a Marine Expeditionary Unit to go out and float in the South Pacific. And so our instructors, I don't think they've ever done this before, but they did it with us. They basically said, all right, hey, for 48 hours, you guys have open season. You can trade infantry battalions amongst yourself.
Wow.
And so, so you can wind up going wherever you want to go. And there was this guy in my class, his whole family was from San Diego. All he wanted to do was go to San Diego, and he had orders to 1st Battalion, 8th Marine Regiment. And I remember sitting there, and he was willing to trade with me. So the last minute I said, I got to take this deployment. So I traded with him. And at Mitchell Hall, which is where IOC is, they have like the crests of every infantry battalion hanging on the wall. So 1-1, which is like a very storied Marine Corps battalion, I think its motto is like whatever it takes. And it has this like cool crest. It's like a dagger with like a dragon swarmed around it. It was like awesome, very beautiful. I remember I made the decision to trade them, so I go up, and I've been looking at the 1-1 crest, knowing I was heading there. I'm like, all right, 1-8, 1-8. And like go down the line, and there's like this sad little crest hanging on a nail. It's not painted, and it says 1-8, the foul weather warriors. And I was just like, oh God, like what did I tell myself? What have I done? And I'm going to camp for June. But that was sort of how, excuse me. And 1-8 was on the first thing smoking over to Iraq. So that was how I wound up at 1-8. Those guys wound up doing the tsunami relief in 2004.
So you finish up training in April. Fallujah II starts in earnest in November, right?
Well, I remember one interesting moment is, I did that swap, and I remember when I was thinking about doing that swap, I had a captain who I knew, basically another friend of mine. He was very good friends with another friend of mine who was sort of like my Marine Corps big brother, and said, hey, look out for Ackerman while he's at the basic school. So as I was sort of debating, am I going to make this trade, I went to this captain, I said to him, I was like, hey, sir, what do you think I should do? He said, listen, Ackerman, 1-1 is doing a MEU deployment. MEU has been and always will be the cutting edge of the Marine Corps. It will set you up to understand MEU operations. And I quote, what the fuck do you want to go to Iraq for? All you're going to be doing there is peacekeeping duty.
Wow.
And it was, the best advice I never took. And so I didn't take his advice and went. And so but I remember that was the attitude, Christmas of 2003. And so then I remember getting an email from a guy I went to college with. I did this 5-year program. So the seniors, my senior class, they were all a year ahead of me. So a friend of mine from college was with 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, and he was with literally the first group of Marines to go back to Iraq after the invasion. And he sends this email, and I've kept it, and I've since forwarded it to Marines who are younger than me whenever they complain about deployments that don't seem action-packed. It's this email of him, and it's like kind of a friends and family email about his relief in place with the 82nd Airborne. He's like, the 82nd Airborne guys say like nothing ever happens here. It's really boring. We did our first patrol and we were all like ninja. Then these kids came up to us. We went to playing soccer with them. I guess it's going to be really a sleepy deployment. They've only caught one guy and he had a rifle. Don't worry about me. I'm fine. And that email is dated like March 3rd, 2004, which was like 2.5 weeks before Fallujah I, Bonatie, everything just exploded. And my friend was, he was in the middle of all of it. And he and I later met up in Iraq as he was leaving. But and I remember Fallujah I happened, and we had come back in from a field exercise. What all happened, we were out in the field, and our instructors had gone and they'd bought like 80 of us in the class, I don't know, so 20 copies of the Washington Post to put one in front of each of our rooms. And the front page of the Washington Post was 2 Marines carrying another dead Marine in a body bag through the streets of Ramadi. And it was sort of like, hey guys, wake up, shit just got real. And a guy from the class before us was killed in Ramadi. One of my friends who was later killed in Iraq was sent to be his combat replacement, graduated early. It was just like things got very, very real. They brought in Jim Webb to talk to us. He said, you guys are the first group of Marines since Vietnam to graduate from this school knowing that you're heading directly into combat.
Wow.
But that was all in the space of like 3 months. So sort of an intense time to be finishing up at Quantico.
Man, so I want to touch on that point where you have this advice from the guy who's supposed to be your big brother and you decide not to take it.
Well, it was actually, the big brother was a different guy.
Right.
And so his friend.
He's looking out for you, right? Mm-hmm. So, was that a tough decision to kind of speak to him and then say, I'm going to go my own way? Like, did you just have this, it sounds like you had the same thing with choosing Tufts and...
It wasn't tough. I sort of, I called another friend of mine, this guy named Doug Zembiec, who was another sort of big brother of mine. He was later killed in Iraq. So, he's sort of kind of an iconic figure in Marine circles. And he actually wound up fighting in the first Battle of Fallujah. So I called him in December right before he was leaving for Iraq. And I said, what do you think I should do? And his advice was he's like, listen, you go on the MEU, you're not going to carry live rounds in your magazine. You go to Iraq, you're going to carry live rounds in your magazine. There's your answer.
And that's what you need.
And that's when, and it was just like, he was very binary about it.
Yeah.
But it was more that there was not clarity as to what was going on there. And I think when you look at it now in retrospect and someone says, Iraq 2004, like, oh, of course, everyone knew what was going on. But at the moment, people didn't know if this was going to last 6 months or 10 years. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think most people would have said it would have lasted 6 months. Now it's going to last 10 years.
That must have been tough when you were at Tufts that final year. All your other buddies get commissioned.
I walked my Marine officer instructor, who's works for the State Department now, still teases me about it. He's like, I remember you coming in, and you were like, I'm going to resign, I'm going to leave school, I'm going to go enlist. And I remember, he jokes about having to talk me out of it. It was excruciating. Yeah. Because I felt as though I'd worked so hard to have this experience, to do this job. It was all I wanted to do. And I felt like I was just, sitting at school writing history papers while it all happened. It was killing.
And everybody's got Gulf War in their mind. Like, this is going to be done by the time I hit the ground, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can relate. So I was at flight school when that was happening, and flight school is pretty long. It's 18 months. And, I just arrived there in the fall of 2002. So I had until 2004 before I could get out the door.
Yeah, which is ridiculous now. Now it's when I talk to like Iraq and Afghan vets, or I'll meet someone, you hear the years they were there, and I'll say like, I was in Iraq in 2004. And it's sort of like saying you were like in Vietnam in 65 or something. Like you were there, right at the beginning. Yep. But it didn't feel like the beginning then. It felt like you were missing it.
Yeah.
It felt like it was over. Like guys used to say, in the middle of the, all during the time when I was in Iraq, even up to like the middle of the Second Battle of Fallujah, guys would say things like, well, back in the war. What the fuck is this? And, but it was just like that had worked its way in the vernacular. Like anyone who'd been there in the invasion, they all referred to the invasion as the war, and whatever we were doing is something else. I remember there was one guy who was a Het Marine, which was like a human exploitation team, like an intel guy, staff sergeant, and he was actually one of the guys who brought in the source that led to like the Jessica Lynch raid. I remember talking to him, and he was one of those guys who always used to say, like, back in the war. And it was like the third day of the Fallujah battle, and we'd had, like, a miserable day fighting, really gnarly. And he was sitting underneath a stairwell, and I was sort of, like, half asleep walking past him, and I sat down. He was smoking a cigarette, and I kind of collapsed next to him. He gave me a cigarette, and I kind of finally looked at him, and I was like, so, back in the war? And he'd been in Al-Naziriyah, and he looked at me and said, like, Al-Naziriyah hasn't got shit on this place. But there was always in the early days, there was that sort of that dynamic that no one could kind of wrap their minds around, the fact that like this was the war. You know?
Oh man. All right. So when you arrived to Iraq, it sounds like April, May. Is that about right?
We got there June.
June. And you came in with your unit. You weren't an individual.
No, the whole battalion deployed.
So you had what, 2 months?
2 months
with them in training before.
A little less, Frank, because we had pre-deployment leave. It was like 2.5 weeks or something like that.
And you were in a platoon leader role when you hit the ground.
Yep. So one of the nice things was when I showed up, my infantry battalion, there's 9 rifle platoons in the battalion, and all 9 of the rifle platoon commanders were classmates of mine from IOC, which usually isn't the case. So it was so that was nice. There was this sort of very strong support system of lieutenants. And the older first lieutenants, we were lucky, were a really, really solid, great crew of guys. Mm-hmm. And sometimes like that isn't the case. You guys are kind of pricks. So these guys were all great. But yeah, so that was sort of the dynamic when I checked in.
Yeah. And so then going from that right into combat, what I wanted to touch on as we talk, just looking back of the things you've written about your time in Fallujah and in the military, speaking to some of the folks clearly you're a gifted, talented leader. So I would think that anybody who's been in the military for these deployments would appreciate it, how hard it is to win over the trust of, I'm assuming, a Marine platoon being one of the hardest.
Sure. I will tell you, when I checked in, when I checked into 1-8, I certainly did not feel like a gifted and talented leader. I'd like, for instance, I'd done well at the basic school. I was like, top of my class and everything, really super focused on being a Marine, had worked hard at that, worked hard to be like tactically competent. And so I remember I showed up, and one of the first things I had the Marines do is, I remember when we were at the infantry officer course, we had all read the Stephen Pressfield book, Gates of Fire, about Thermopylae, and we talked about it. I thought that was great. It was a good way to get everyone talking. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to have the guys read Starship Troopers, which is this sort of science fiction novel. They made a movie out of it, but the novel's actually, it's a very smart, I don't know if you've read it, but we get all the guys to read Starship Troopers. So out of my own pocket, I went and bought like 46 copies of Starship Troopers, gave one to each of the guys. They were going to read like a chapter a week, or which was like nothing. But and we're going to talk about it once a week. And man, they did not like that. It was like mutiny. It's interesting. The young Marines liked it. The ones who'd like just shown up from Paris Island or from San Diego from boot camp, like they kind of liked it and they did it. It was all the NCOs. the NCOs, they had done the deployment before. They'd been on the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit during the Iraq invasion. And frankly, they hadn't done a thing. They went to the airport in Mosul and secured the airport for 2 weeks and then came back on the ship. I think someone had done a spray and pray by the airport. So, they all got their combat action ribbons out of that. But it was BS. But there was the big looming, back in Mosul, guys would this in Mosul, that in Mosul. And so I gave the guys the book to read. And then one of the things that was really in vogue at that time was this idea of something called satellite patrolling that the Australians had used to great effect in East Timor. So we were all learning how to satellite patrol, where it's basically one fire team in the squad will follow the route and the other ones will sort of randomly satellite around it, kind of in a disrupted pattern. So, the enemy never really knows where you're going. Okay. But it was sort of like a patrolling ballet. It was complicated to do. Yeah. So I remember this one day we were sort of just in garrison. We didn't have a lot to do, and I was trying to come up with training for the next day. And the guy I'd replaced, who's still a good friend of mine, was a guy named Dave Lee. And Dave's 6'3", big bear of a Marine officer, very charismatic, and the Marines loved Dave. And he had moved over to the weapons company, so he was sort of still around. And they would sort of look at him, Lieutenant Lee, we wish you were still with us. And, and I'm just trying to get these guys to get along with me. And so this one day we're in garrison, and I was like, all right, what are we going to do tomorrow? We don't have much going, so I'm going to have the guys, satellite patrol. So I told each squad leader, hey, listen, tonight go back, write a 5-paragraph order, give me a route around Camp Lejeune. I want you to take out your squads, satellite patrol. Let's give me the order and give me the map overlay tomorrow when work starts. So the next morning, my second squad leader comes in and gives me his little short 1-page order and this overlay. Great, thank you. Third squad leader the same. And my first squad leader, this guy Adam Bonatie, walks in. And I'm like, hey, Sergeant Bonatie, do you have your overlay and your order? And he's like, yeah, no, sorry, I didn't do it. I'm like, okay. I'm like, what do you mean you didn't do it? He's like, I think it's dumb training. I didn't do it. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, what are you going to do? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, all right, hey, listen, why don't you come back here in half an hour? So I write up this counseling sheet for him very quickly on my laptop. I print it out. I tell my platoon sergeant, hey, meet me in the duty hub, which is a private office that I want to talk to Adam Bonatie, Sergeant Bonatie. So I sit there, I made this counseling sheet, and he comes in front of us, and my platoon sergeant, was a good enough guy, but he's kind of standing there, and I had this counseling sheet, and Sergeant Bonatie was a meritorious sergeant for the entire division. He was a phenomenal Marine, but just frankly, had an attitude, and his attitude was kind of what made him a good Marine. But he wasn't cutting me any slack. And so on my counseling sheet, I have technical competence 1 through 5. He's 5. Physical fitness 5. He's 5s all the way down. Then we have leadership, and I mark him a 1, completely deficient. And I said, then I explain, Sergeant Bonatie, leadership is a two-way street. It's not just have to do with your guys. It's loyalty up, loyalty down. By not doing this and offer me no solution, you've been incredibly disloyal to me. I've marked you deficient on leadership. Please sign this counseling statement. I'm going to insert into your service record book, which is his permanent record. Yeah. And he just stares at the counseling sheet, looks at me and goes, sir, what the fuck do you know about leading Marines? I was leading Marines when you were still in college. So I sort of remember my platoon sergeant, his eyes going wide, but he didn't do anything. Yeah. And I said, okay, very well, but just why don't you sign the sheet? And he handed the sheet back, kind of threw it at me and walked out of the room. And so it was a lot of fun to go to Iraq with that being sort of the leadership dynamic in your platoon. Yeah. And that was how, that was basically how things stood when we deployed.
Yeah. So, Elliot didn't mention it, but he was gracious enough to let me talk to Adam before this interview. And Adam recalled that very same account just as it was described.
He was probably laughing.
He was laughing. He says, you have to ask Elliot about that. And then what I asked Adam, and I'll ask you the same question, but I asked Adam, at what point did you realize, were you able to put that moment behind you with Elliot? Because talking to Adam for an hour and a half, it's clear he has a ton of respect for Elliot, sees him, in his own words, as one of the most talented leaders he worked for through 5 deployments with the Marine Corps. And he said there was this moment where you guys were patrolling down a street. One of your guys, I think, triggered an IED. You had to pull this guy out to set up a casualty collection point, and you essentially gave the fight to Adam at the time. And it was just instinctive, Adam, you got this. I got to go do leadership stuff over here. I need you to control the area.
Yeah.
And it was kind of unspoken. This is his explanation. And that there didn't need to be anything said. And it was kind of at that moment he assumed he had your trust, and maybe vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I track like the evolution of things with the platoon. There's a few different moments because it's, you're dealing with different guys. There was that moment, particularly with Adam. I remember, just to call it a different moment, was we got to Iraq, and it was late June, and I remember we were getting inserted on a foot patrol in July outside of Fallujah, and I was in the lead vehicle as we were getting inserted, and my vehicle had a huge ID. It was 4 155 rounds, so 2 rounds in 2 different holes, and they weren't very good at packing IDs in, so actually it blew up, and the blast arc went over our truck, shattered all the windows, but we were fine. I sort of got out of the truck, and we sort of did our react to contact drill. And I remember in the platoon, we'd maybe been in country for like 10 days at that point, but I just remember there was this mellowing in the platoon. It was sort of like, hey, like Lieutenant got blown up, I guess he's all right, like he's good by us. I remember things sort of settled down after that. I think there's just a clarity that comes with being in combat. Like there's everyone, it gets your attention pretty quickly, and you realize like little dumb, excuse my French, like cock measuring games. Like there's really no place for them. But that specific incident, we were on a battalion sweep in August in Haditha, kind of literally just the whole battalion online searching for weapons. It was a dumb operation, and it was so hot they were cycling platoons in and out, so we were going in the second part of the day. But you can imagine it was basically a whole battalion going from north to south. We started in the morning
in August
in Iraq.
Yeah. And
we started in the morning at like 6 a.m. and we were going, very slowly from north to south along the Euphrates. So it was like clear we were going, and so like the Al Qaeda guys just put IEDs everywhere because they're like, we're going to go right down this road. We know where they're coming, and so as we were on that patrol, IED went off on the road. Sort of like IED went off, and then like quick complex ambush. And so one of the guys in the platoon blew his leg off, and so we were dealing with that. We were dealing with a complex ambush. We were dealing with his medevac. And it was sort of basic, like like squad leader, do your job, like fight your squad. Call me if you got a problem, and I'll call you to tell you if you need to move. Watch the riverbank, and so I think it's just intuitive to me. I'm not going to fight a squad. I got a whole, I got a platoon worth of headaches to deal with. Exactly. So, but I think when I think of sort of leadership in the Marine Corps too, I had another Marine, not Adam, but a guy named Dean Long, and he's actually a captain now. So he stayed in, became an officer as an infantry officer. But I remember he was an interesting guy. When we showed up, the battalion we replaced was 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. And so we were a little bit under strength coming into Iraq. And so at 3-4, they said, hey, if anyone amongst the enlisted guys, if any of you guys want to extend and go over to 1-8, you can extend. Wow. And there weren't a lot of takers, but there was one, and one of them was Dean Long. And he's this sort of 6'2", blonde-haired, blue-eyed, square-jawed guy. And if you ever asked him, he had a great sense of humor. If you ever say, like, I remember talking to a few times, like, hey, Corporal Long, like, why did you extend? And he'd be like, he'd look at you stone face and say, hey, sir, got to fight the GPWD. You're like, what's that? The Great Patriotic War in the Desert. So I remember at one point sitting, we were out on patrol at night, and we were just sitting in our Humvees, like we were spread out in security. And I was sitting on radio watch, and he was up on like the 240 Golf, the machine gun in the turret. Just doing his watch, and we were just got to talking, and I was talking to him about the difference between like our platoon and the platoon he'd just come from in 3-4, and so we started talking about his old platoon commander, and he paid me a compliment, but it was one of those sort of lightning to me. He said, he's like, well, my old platoon commander, he was always like up in your business and like kind of screaming, and we never really knew what his deal was. He was like, seemed like he was like acting like some John Wayne figure, how he thought a platoon commander should act, and he's like, Ackerman's like, you kind of sit around, like you talk with us, like we know about a little bit about your life back home. You tell jokes with us, like, there's a level of familiarity that exists. And he's like, so like we know you. And he's like, and so I might be on the radio, and I might be on patrol, and you might tell me like go left, and it doesn't make any sense to me. I think I should probably be going right down this road. But you're like, no, it's left. And like, well, like I know you, and because I know you, I trust you, and so I trust that you're telling me to do the right thing. And it seems like a really obvious thing, but like, leadership in combat, like, find it a lot of the times you are not going to be able to sit down and really explain to the guys what you need them to do so they really understand. Like, they are just going to have to trust you. And even when it looks like maybe they shouldn't be doing what you want them to do. So, and how can you trust someone who you like really kind of don't know? So you're always walking this fine line between letting the guys in so they know who you are and they can feel good about you, and but then letting them in too much because you're playing a position. They need you to be a certain figure. They don't need the buddy. They need you to play a certain role for them.
Yeah.
So so it's a fine line to walk, and if I hope I walked it well with all those guys, but it's something you just sort of learn.
And that sounds like probably a huge confidence boost at that time, right? Because it's pretty rare you get that feedback from one of your own guys saying, "Yeah, I really like the way that you."
Yeah, I think the thing is like being in, having done a deployment in 2006 that was on a Navy ship where frankly not a whole hell of a lot happened. Being a platoon commander, then being a platoon commander in combat, I mean it's like dog years. You could do 1 week in Iraq with a platoon, and it would be the equivalent of like a year on a MU with a platoon. Right. The way you get to know guys, like the trust that gets built, it's really, really sink or swim.
Yeah. So I want to use that to jump into your time in Fallujah. So maybe if you could just set up the context of November 2004, kind of leading up into that, as you guys are going in, and I think I read one of your articles where you described how you guys had to kind of sneak across the main phase line, Highway 10, I think, to get in to Fallujah initially. But just to set the context.
When we showed up in Iraq, Fallujah, there had been the battle in the spring, and what had happened was the deal that nominally ended that battle was all U.S. forces left the city, and they stood up this thing called the Fallujah Brigade, which was just Iraqis, and they would be in control of the city. Well, it basically didn't. It only existed on paper, and Al-Qaeda ran Fallujah, and it was a no-go place for all American troops. So if you were in Al-Anbar, everyone knew all the bad stuff was happening in Fallujah. All the IEDs, everything was their sanctuary. So it was very obvious to us early on that there was going to be a second battle in Fallujah. And even the most junior PFC in the platoon would come up to me and say hey, sir, so there's going to have to be another battle in Fallujah. Our battalion rotates back to the States in February. The presidential election is in November. So you think we'll probably go at the beginning of November after the election? And yeah, that sounds about right. And that's exactly when we went. Wow. So everyone kind of knew this thing was coming. And so we all got the orders to go down there in October. Before that, we'd been, kind of doing the counterinsurgency bit around Al-Anbar, getting IED, getting into little firefights here and there. But, Fallujah was sort of this outlier, this big set-piece conventional urban battle that was about to go down. And so they lined up 6 battalions, 4 Marine battalions, 2 Army battalions. We basically got on line at the north of the city. They assigned us, 6 lanes we were basically running, and we wound up by and large pushing north to south through the city. So 1/8 lane was right in the middle of the city. And so we, and the city is bisected by a road called Highway 10, which basically runs east-west through the city. Also called Line Fran. That's what it was on our military maps. And as our battalion was pushing in, our company was tasked with seizing the government complex, which is right in the center of the city. So it's sort of we were doing a mechanized raid. So I was an Alpha company. So Bravo and Charlie companies on the first day of the battle, they basically fought to kind of open this corridor for us. And on the second day of the battle, we got in these Amtraks, which are armored personnel carriers, and we shot through their corridor in the middle of the night, and then went up 400 meters deeper, seized the government center, and then all the next day, Bravo and Charlie fought up to us. So we were kind of were isolated in the government center. So that was the first day of the battle, and then our platoon on the second day. This was sort of one of the most eventful days for our platoon. Everyone had fought up to phase line Fran, and the second day was okay. Everyone is going to cross phase line Fran today. And phase line Fran is this big, say it's 6-lane highway. It's not a fun idea to cross it in the middle of the day. And big high rises on both sides, which are chock full of insurgents. And later on, what we kind of realized was that the main line of resistance for all of the Al-Qaeda guys was the south side of phase line Fran, what we were crossing into. So our platoon, after that first day of fighting, had wound up kind of the southernmost platoon. And so my company commander said, okay, you guys are your mission is going to be to get a foothold for the battalion as we cross France. So we'll have, in the morning when everyone crosses, we'll have one platoon that's already, kind of has this little toehold for us. So phase line France sort of splits, if you can imagine, and it kind of like how roads like almost like into a pizza slice, which is what we called it, like kind of this gradual split. And this pizza slice was right in front of us. It was like a wedge of road. So we said, okay, we'll go. There's this building that looks like a good building to fight from. We looked at it through our night vision goggles. Said, all right, this is the building we're going to go in and occupy. And so we called in a C-130 gunship. So we're going to have the gunship do prep fires on the building for us just to make sure if there are any bad guys in there, they're shooken up or killed. So we did that. It was like 3 a.m. And squad at a time, we rush across the road and we get into the building. I'll never forget, Bonatie's squad was the first one to go across, and we're all bounding down the road, and I run into the building, and it's just like debris and dust and shit, and I'm on night vision goggles, and I like bump into Bonatie, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? He's like coughing, and the gunship had done too good of a job, so we climbed up the rubble and we'd blown out the whole back of the building, and we couldn't fight from it now. And so we were sort of in this position of like, well, what do we do? Do we go back? And I tell my company commander, the building, we can't get across. You're not going to do that. So we sort of peeked around. We saw that if we went about 100 meters deeper into the city, deeper than we intended to go, there was another building that looked like we could fight from it. And so we decided to go into that building. So we crossed the road another time, and that building was like a 2-story building with sort of a parapet around the roof that we could fight from. And in the middle of the night, we occupied that building, and it was a candy store. And so inside the candy store, we at that point, we're kind of running low. We hadn't really been resupplied, so we're running low on water, running low on food. And remember, all the Marines were fortifying the candy store, but everyone's we found Pringles, Snickers, like Fanta. Yeah, Jack, so everyone's drinking, eating, I remember we had these bags of salt. So we didn't have sandbags. We were stacking bags of salt as sandbags all around the windows. And then the sun came up that morning, and we just saw, because we were kind of, behind enemy lines at that point, we just saw these insurgents, wearing their black masks, their black outfits, just diddy bopping up to the front line, it ain't no thing, just walking down the street. So we start calling in artillery on them, shooting at them, but it didn't take long before they sort of figure out where we were. And so by late morning, they had surrounded us. At that point, and the initial assault was supposed to be first thing in the morning, but we were kind of hitting such stiff resistance, and the guys back at the government center were also hitting stiff resistance. So it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. Mm-hmm. And then I remember about 9:30 or 10 in the morning, I had a machine gunner, a kid named Brown, was prone, working his 240, and a round came in and ricocheted off the roof and went down into Brown's leg and clipped his femoral artery, and he was just bleeding everywhere. So we need to run a medevac for him. It's my staff sergeant, my platoon sergeant was dealing with that medevac, and within a minute or two he's in there dealing with Brown. Then another round comes in and he gets shot in the head, and went through his helmet, grazed his skull, and knocked him unconscious.
Platoon sergeant.
My platoon sergeant, yeah. And so we were trying to so now we've got this medevac on our hands, so we call back for medevac. Remember, they send 2 AAVs, armored personnel carriers, out of the government center to come run the medevac, and they make it maybe 50 meters out of the government center, and 2 RPGs take them out. And so the guys from the AAVs, they then literally ran on foot back to the government center. Brown's bleeding out at this point, and so. And the whole thing's going down over company TAC, our internal company frequency. Everyone can hear it, and I'm screaming. They're pop smoke. I'm throwing out smoke. They're where's your smoke? It's the purple smoke. There's smoke everywhere. You know what I mean? Trying to figure this out. And there was, I talked a little bit about how, the more the older lieutenants, the first lieutenants, were just good guys. And so there's this one first lieutenant who was with a MAP platoon, a mobile assault platoon. It's a Humvees with heavy guns. And he was listening to the whole thing go down. His name's Sonny Risler. But these Humvees are not armored, thin skin. At that point you didn't really have the up armored Humvees you had later in the war, basically mine blankets, and that was it. And Sonny just comes tearing ass down Highway 10 with this sort of ne'er-do-well platoon of Marines in their Humvees, and and did the medevac. After literally burning next to him were 2 AAVs, and so I never forgot that. Sonny's a damn hero, and got Brown and got my platoon sergeant out. And Brown was so close when they finally got him to the battalion aid station. They did last rites on him, and he managed to survive. So, but. So that happened. And I remember at this point it was by the time all this had gone down, it was, like kind of afternoonish. And and there was kind of this constant back and forth between myself and my company commander of like, when are we going across, when are they going to come across Fran? When are we going to assault deeper into the city? And we're arguing with him. I mean, he was a great company commander. He's still in the Marine Corps as a colonel now. If there's any justice, he'll be a general. But he and I were having this argument on the radio, and I'm just saying, like, you don't understand. Like, if we, like, go out, we're going to get slaughtered if we leave this house. Like, can't we just wait until it gets dark? I mean, it's going to be dark in 2 hours. We'll just do this under the cover of darkness. Like, and you don't understand. We have to push. I mean, like, you don't understand. Like, we are surrounded.
Wow.
If we push, this is going to be bad. He's like, I understand. I'm like, no, you don't. And
this is all on a radio.
All on the radio.
All this stuff is going.
All hell's going
to
loose.
Your platoon sergeant.
The Marines are hard pointing at the window shooting, but they're also, I remember, you talk about, like, what's the job of a platoon commander? Why do you show up? Why, when you're 17, do you want to go in the Marines? I can track it, like, in my Marine Corps career, maybe a half dozen times where I felt like this is where you earn your pay, Elliot. Mm-hmm. And I remember the Marines all watching me as I'm having this conversation with him, and I know because they see what I see. Wow. Like, if we leave this place, like, it is going to be really bad for us. And they know my ability to, like, appropriately convey the situation. Like, it's their lives. Like, the way this thing goes is, like, their life. And I didn't convince them, like, we shouldn't have gone. And he and I later talked about that. And he said to me, he's like, I understood what you were dealing with. He's like, you don't understand. I was getting from, like, the division commander down that we had to go because they were terrified that there would be this perception of the Marines getting bogged down in Fallujah. We needed to get to the south end of the city. So, like, from the generals down, there was all this pressure to go, hit these phase lines. So, I mean, it wasn't like, I don't want to make it like it was a huge argument, but it was, probably a back and forth for about 5 or 10 minutes. And he's like, we're going. I'm like, okay, I guess we're going. And I remember I walked downstairs because there was one doorway in and out of the building. And I go to open the door to see if we can get out. And I, like, stick my head out and, like, it's a PKM, like, right down this alleyway. And I remember, like, oh shit, I kind of tumbled back in. And I still very clearly remember watching, there was this sort of low brick wall, maybe head height. And there were these, like, pigeons. They were, like, trying to land on the wall. And they couldn't land because this guy just kept like, 2 to 3 round burst, like, letting me know he was there. Yeah. And watching these pigeons, like, couldn't land on the wall. I remember I turned around, and Adam Bonatie since talked to me about it. It's not like I bumped into Bonatie. He's like, are we going out that way? I go, it's suicide if we go out there. And he later told me, he's like, that's the one time I was really scared. Was when you said that.
Wow.
And then...
because you feel trapped effectively at that point.
I think. Well, it's just how are we going to get out of here?
Yeah.
How are we getting out of here? Like, they know they've been sitting here fighting with us all morning. They know, like, there's one door in. They've got all that. They've moved in position. That door's completely dialed in. They've got it covered. I think it's frankly a miracle I didn't get shot when I stuck my head out. And so I bumped into Bonatie, and we had this guy, our engineer who built us the whole deployment was a guy named Davies. Davies was funny. He was from Tennessee. He had this disease called, like, periodontitis, caused all of his teeth to fall out when he was, like, 15 or something. So he had no teeth. So he used to wear dentures. But in that July, when we'd been based in Al-Assad, which is a big air base, and there'd been this, and we were living in tents at that point, and there was the Great Tent Fire of July '04 in Al-Assad, and his teeth had gone up in the fire. So they said, hey, we'll fly you to Ramstein. We can get you new teeth made. It'll take like 3 to 4 weeks. And he was like, I'm not leaving for 3 to 4 weeks. Like, I missed the deployment. So he did the whole deployment with no teeth. So, like, the joke, it's the joke when you're, like, eating your MRE. It's always like, hey, I got peanuts. David, you want my peanuts for my MRE? So he had no teeth. I mean, he had like 2 or 3. So he was our combat engineer. Yeah. So, like, look at Davies. We talk quickly. I'm like, how are we going to get out of here? And Davies like, well, we could blow a hole out of the other side of the building. So we're like, that sounds like a good idea. So we basically, like, packed the one wall with C4. I got, like, all the Marines down in the basement. And then right when the company called over, it was like, we're crossing Fran, boom, we blew out the back wall of our building. We all started hauling ass out this back wall. And at that point, we linked up with these 2 tanks. We started this assault that was take us 400 meters deeper into the city up to this, basically an arbitrary point on the map. It was called Phase Line Blue. Mm-hmm. And we were assaulting up to Phase Line Blue. And it was like early afternoon at this point. And still to this day, like, when I think of that time itself gets, like, super blurry. I can't tell if it was 15 minutes we were assaulting to Phase Line Blue or, like, 2 days. But they had locked all of the doors into every house, was completely padlocked shut, so we couldn't, we were going down this alley getting shot up. We couldn't get in to take cover anywhere. So it was like Marines banging their rifle butts on the doors trying to break the locks, and we were just getting ground up. I remember Adam's squad, we were basically went first squad, second squad, third squad. By maybe the first 45 minutes of this, which was like 100 meters, Adam's squad was combat ineffective, so they had to get sent to the back. Another guy named Jordan Latfa, who was the other squad leader, he took over. He was now running his squad as our point squad. Maybe 30 minutes after that, his squad was really taken down. An RPG exploded next to him. He was, taken out, medevaced out. So we got completely ground up that day. And I remember finally, we get the call from my company commander, like, hey, phase line blue, everyone, like, go firm, which meant, like, just, like, get into a building. So we're trying to get the whole squad, the whole platoon into a building. We were spread out. It was a whole kind of disaster trying to get everyone in the building. Finally, we get everyone consolidated in the building. And then I remember, I ran upstairs. So now we're fighting from the rooftops. We have these tanks in front of us, and so we're, marking targets for tanks. And my company XO, first lieutenant, guy named Doug Krugman, we all called Special K, but Krugman still tells the story. He's like, I remember when I finally linked up with you guys, and I ran in to the house you were at. He's like, the whole bottom floor of the house was just like covered with wounded guys from your platoon. And I remember walked in there, and he's like, I didn't know what was going on. And he's like, I walked in there, I didn't know what the hell was going on. I just screamed, like, who the fuck is in charge here? And one of your Marines looks up and goes, Doc.
Who?
Doc. The corpsman's in charge.
Jeez.
So, and I remember too, I was up on this rooftop, and this was sort of a real, like combat leadership sucker punch of a moment. Was so I lost my platoon sergeant. We had a platoon guide. It's kind of Sergeant Menard, and so I asked Corey Menard. I was like, "Hey, I need to know at this point, like, how many combat effective Marines do we have? Like, how many guys can like actually fight at this point?" And we'd started the day with 46, 46 guys. Like, that was the number. That was the platoon roster, and we had everybody on the roster that morning. And he goes back to the county. He comes back up. He's like, "I got the number. It was 21." And like a lot of those guys, like, came back, were returned, flesh wound bandaged up, they were fine. But I just remember being like, Jesus Christ, like that was a bad day.
And it doesn't really end there, right? Because this is, if I recall, Adam telling you're up on the roof. Is this where you're calling in?
Yeah, well, and it's always like the comedy. So we had this. So one of our machine gunners, this guy named Corporal Ramon Berano from Chicago, who we all just call Benji. He classic, like, one of the things about the Fallujah battle I remember was that, it was such a set piece battle. Like, guys join the Marine Corps because they have a vision of what a Marine is. And so, most of those visions like kind of come out of Hollywood in some ways. So, and this, people have asked me, what was it like fighting in Fallujah? And the closest thing I can say, quickly is, like, you ever see Full Metal Jacket? Like, it was literally just, it was like that. And it was this sort of strange, like, surreal, we had a joke, like, it's your favorite war movie and you're the star, because, like, you would find yourself saying things like, everybody on me, and you'd be like, I can't believe I just said that, but seriously, everybody on me, because, like, we got to go. And I remember, like, the second the battle started, like, all the Marines just kind of felt like, like, discipline's, like, slacking. So, like, I remember, like, looking around and, like, suddenly, like, this kid Opon was, like, rocking, like, the ace of spades in his helmet. And, like, I remember Benji, machine gun, like, he always had, like, the Pancho Villa, 7.62 across his chest. So I remember that day, Benji's up there with his, like, bandoliers of machine gun ammo, cigarette dangling. And we had these tanks in front of us. So we, one of the things I did as a platoon commander, which sort of works so antenna, was I would pack my magazines with tracer rounds, so you could mark for the guys shooting. You see my tracers, that's where the lieutenant's shooting to get you guys to shoot there. But 5.56 tracer's pretty light, particularly in the daytime. Like, it's tough to see. So for the tankers, they're all buttoned up in their tanks, so they can't really see much of anything. It's tough for them. And we can see everything, and it's a classic tactical thing, team tank, team infantry, you work together. And so we were figuring out where all the insurgents were shooting at us from. We would call the tanks on. So the way we would do it was we would basically, they couldn't see my tracer, so we would get the 240, because the 240 had a heavy enough tracer they could see that. And so we would basically 240, all right, there it is, shoot, and I'd be on the radio, like, Benji, give me a burst, blah, 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 blah. I'd be telling the tanker, like, all right, you tally my mark. Like, oh, I see the mark. Like, all right, put one right there. They put one from the main gun right in, like, the window that we were shooting at. So that was sort of our rhythm. So we had all the guys up on the roof fighting at that point, and there were some a handful of dudes, like they basically got a beat on us, and they were just slinging RPGs into our building. So at that point, I'm like, us shooting isn't doing a lot, and when we've got 2 tanks, so do we really need everybody up on the roof? So I said, all right, everybody get down on the roof, but except for like me and Benji, because I'm going to talk to the tanks, and Benji's going to mark the rounds. So I remember, at one point, like I'm trying to talk Benji, we're like barely picking our heads up off this parapet. I'm trying to talk Benji onto a window, and he's like not getting it. So I'm like, God damn it, Benji, get off the gun. And I go like pick up the machine gun, and I haven't shot at this point like a 240 since, I was on the range in Quantico, but like Lieutenant like grabs the machine, give it to me, Benji. I like shoot it, and it just, like bucks up like wild and like spray the air. Benji's like, Jesus Christ, like you idiot.
Yeah.
Just like those great like moments of comedy, because I was like, I'm sitting here, but you're still like the dumbass lieutenant, with his machine gun.
Yeah.
So we wound up doing that, with the tanks, and I just remember that day was there were other days in the battle that were intense in different ways, but that was a particularly grueling day. The one thing, and this goes back to like even that day, like that ambush we were talking about with Bonatie on like the banks of Euphrates. People don't talk about it much, like how physically taxing it is when you're in a real, like legit, long kind of firefight. The thing that I always remembered, like my sensory memory of that time. Here's the one thing: it's not like the smell of cordite or screaming. Like I remember that day I screamed myself hoarse for the rest of the battle. I had no voice. I was like, this is Lieutenant Ackerman. Yeah. But it was the sensation of my socks being wet in my boots, because I would sweat completely through my clothes all the way down into my socks. My socks would be covered in sweat. And so, we would have that day on the Euphrates, we had we had a lot of guys down with heat stroke. It was August, Iraq, in a firefight, guys just passing out. We needed a MEDEVAC for Bagarella who lost his leg. We needed water too, desperately. And the same thing, in Fallujah, you had guys going down, not necessarily for heat stroke, like, blast concussions from the tanks. The tank overpressure was knocking guys, kind of ringing their bells and knocking them. It was, everyone tells you have to be fit, but like it really, can just crush your body. It's like running a marathon.
Yeah, so Adam was explaining this fight as well, and that's kind of what he spoke to. And he said, once you came out of that candy store, you're with the tanks, and he said it was like a movie. Like every open window had a muzzle flash in it. Mm-hmm. And then kind of you go up to the top of the building. And I remember reading one of your articles, and you mentioned, I think this is the day you started at 9:17 in the morning, you finished at 11:50 p.m.
Yeah.
You started with 46, ended with 21 combat effective troops, right? And that was day 2 or day 3.
It was day 2 of the battle.
You were there for 28 more days, right? So Adam was explaining it was tough for you guys in that initial push to get to essentially your objective. Mm-hmm. But then he said what was harder, like more taxing mentally, was coming back and re-clearing that space afterwards.
Well, I remember there was always this question in the platoon. We waited from the north to the south of the city. I think it was 6 days.
Right.
And so there was always this thing, and by the time like that day was over, of the platoon, our platoon was organized. We had 3 squads with 2 fire teams in each squad. So we were already a little bit under strength. Like you say 46, but that includes like machine gunners, engineers, like the actual core rifle platoon. I think that day of the 3 squad leaders, only 1 was left. And of the original 6 fire team leaders, only 2 were left. So, you had like a lance corporal was running one of the squad. These are great Marines, but like this was, we had been sort of like decapitated in terms of our leadership. And so, I don't think there's any great tribute to me necessarily, but I remember the Marines getting very like protective of me. Yeah. Not because like they love me so much, but like we lose the lieutenant, who's running things here. Like he's like the only one who's still sort of, with us, So I think that was kind of a whole, dynamic just psychologically that everything got reorganized, and everyone had to step up, and they did a great job stepping up. But you had to go on kind of under strength, and then slowly, guys like the guys who were able to rejoined us. Once you'd like taken fragmentation or had like concussion or blast injuries. After like a week or 2, like Adam was evac that day, and then came back to us. And then came back to us like 10 days later. But there was always this question of like, we knew how quickly we were going through the city. We knew we were not clearing every house or killing every bad guy. And it was like, so what do we do when we get to the south end? And that was, and I remember they handed us maps, and it was the entire city broken down into sectors, where literally every building had a number inside the sector. And our company commander being like, so we're just going to go and we're going to clear every single building in the city.
So that's the last piece I want to focus on. And it's really kind of, for those who weren't there, I know as I talk to people who are not in Fallujah about that fighting, that's kind of the image we have in our head of 4 or 5 Marines stacked up against a wall getting ready to breach a door. And it's like door 1 of 40 that day. And you're just clearing rooms and buildings.
Yeah. I mean, people have asked me, like, what's the bravest thing you saw in Fallujah? And I will say, to this day, it's like watching like the PFCs and Lance Corporals go room after room, house after house, day after day, just playing this elaborate game of Russian roulette.
Right?
This huge game of Russian roulette. And what the insurgents quickly figured out to do, early on, like they'd see you coming, they start shooting at you, you shoot at them. Very quickly, they realized, well, if we shoot at them, they're just going to surround us. And then they will bring up a tank or a D9, which are these armored bulldozers we borrowed from the Israelis, actually, and just bulldoze the building. So we're not going to do that. They said, so what they started doing was they would barricade themselves in the building. They'd wait until you came to clear it, and they would have like a guy with like a light machine gun or something in one corner of the building trained on the door. The second the first Marine stepped through the door, the guy with the machine would stitch the Marine up, and there would be 2 guys standing on either side of the door jamb waiting to drag him inside. So they'd shoot the Marine, he'd fall down, they'd drag him inside the house, and now you don't know, is he alive, is he dead? You can't level the building. And you just basically got to go and clear it out room to room, and and they would take as many of you with them, knowing that they were all going to die. And that scenario played out a bunch of times in the city, a bunch of times in our battalion and our company too. So
all day you're sitting there, kind of not sending them in. I mean, you got to clear these buildings essentially. So you got a squad or a team that's breaching, another team goes in to clear, reset. Another room.
Yeah, another house. You'd usually have like a squad up on the roof, that would have like a good vantage point, so if anyone's like running between buildings, you can shoot at them. And then you'd have a squad that would be like sitting there kind of staged, like a reserve almost, just like waiting. And then you would have a squad that would do the clear. And so the squad that does the clear, and then maybe they would like go up to the rooftop of their building. Okay, we can see from here. Then we'd break down and go link up with them. They would become the security squad. The other squad would tear up. And you're just like rotating this thing through, going, building by building by building through the city.
Was it tough for you, or kind of how did you deal with sending these guys? Like, you're probably sitting there across the street watching, trying to direct them as they move, and knowing like, all right, here we go. These guys are going in. These 4 guys, I know all of them. I know their families. Did you have to give some type of a pep talk to these guys occasionally to keep them motivated, get them out of a complacent state?
No, I don't.
Yourself, was it tough sending them in again?
I don't think it was tough sitting them in again, frankly, because it's like, like we're Marines. Like, this is what Marines do. Like, this is what I signed up for. This is what you signed up for. So I didn't feel like that was tough per se. I felt that, I knew it was difficult to keep doing what we were doing. This is what you signed up for. It's what we all signed up for. So, my focus was more just on wanting to, when we made contact, be smart and do the right job, not be wasteful.
Right.
So that's sort of like where my head was at, was getting this thing done in the best way possible.
So, not to take up any more of your time here, Elliot, I know there's probably hours we could do with your time in MARSOC and your different adventures. As you look back on those deployments, was Fallujah the toughest time for you as a soldier, as a leader? Was there a time where you think back and you're like, no, this was a little bit harder?
It's tough to say what was the most difficult, because I think each deployment had different challenges. I would say one of the most challenging things that happened in Fallujah was about 5 days into the battle. One of the squad leaders came up to me, and there were 2 Marines who were both fire team leaders in the platoon, and they had actually married a pair of sisters, so they were brother-in-law. And both very good, really solid Marines. And their squad leader, who was he was the squad leader left over, came up to me at like the 5th day and was like, hey, you need to go talk to this Marine. I was like, what do you mean I need to talk to him? What's wrong with him? He's like, he's not doing well. And I went and go talk to this guy. He'd been a great Marine the whole deployment. He had I was like, what's going on, And he was just shaking his head, looking at the ground. He's like, I can't do it. I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. I'm like, what do you mean you can't take it anymore? It's like, I think of every time I go in the building, I think of my daughter. I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. And I said to him, you need to, and like learning what I learned and knowing, like, hey, something like that is contagious. Like if that happens, like, you've got to get that person out of here, not just for their own sake, but for everybody's sake in the unit. Yeah, I said to him, all right, you want to go talk? You want to go back? You want to go talk to the chaplain? He's like, yeah. And within 30 minutes, we had him gone and back in the rear, And then I remember after a month, we came back and he had stayed back in the rear, never rejoined us. I remember thinking, he was part of our platoon. Everybody knew this guy. And I was like, how do I talk to the Marines about this? These two Marines, they're brothers-in-law. They married a pair of sisters. And the guys were mad. This was that moment where we were like desperately understrengthened. This was like one of the most tactically proficient Marines in the unit. And he just said, like, I want to leave.
They're mad at him?
Personally,
mad at you?
Yeah. No, they're mad at him. Personally, yeah. I was personally mad at him. I'm like, hey, man, like, I get it. But we all volunteered to be here, and like people are dying. And when you tell me you want to just leave, okay, but you're leaving me here. You know what I mean? You're leaving all of us. And I'm thinking long and hard, like, what do I say to them? Do I bring the whole platoon in and say, hey, let's talk about how we're going to treat this Marine. Let's talk about this is, hey, these things happen. It's a, what's the line that I take? How do I tell these guys to think about this? And frankly, what I just decided to do is I didn't say anything. I was like, I made the decision, like, listen, there's a certain part of these guys that I need to respect. It's the part of them that's like their emotions. If one of the guys feels like I want to forgive him, and then he can, but I'm not going to tell these guys, like, as an authority figure, that they need to forgive this guy, because I understand like how that cuts, and maybe I need to be respectful of their emotions in this and just leave them to their emotions on. But I remember thinking really hard, just really like not like doing a lot of searching, like what's the correct leadership response to this. And I've thought about it. I'm not saying what I did was the right thing. I've thought about it a lot since. And I know he went through, has gone through hell with that whole thing. And, and it comes back to what we were talking about beginning, like, not understanding war until you have kids. And I've felt a lot more empathy for him since I've had kids. But at the same time, I remember what it felt like during those days, and the idea that like someone who'd been, key player on the team was just going to be like, what, I think I'm going to go back to the rear now, was like guys took it personally, and it was tough for me to tell them that they shouldn't take it personally. And
you could never imagine that scenario in the schoolhouse either, I would imagine.
People would talk about it. Like they would teach classes at the basic school, like killology and courage, but it was always like, it was academic.
Yeah.
And, it was like people will sustain psychological wounds, but when it happens, it's not an abstraction. It's like this guy was my friend. We are in a life and death struggle, and he is telling me that, he's going to just leave. So,
all right. So let's jump then to what you have going on now. So that you have a lot going on. I want you to be able to kind of share what that is. And as I mentioned before, I read Green on Blue novel you wrote, and Dark at the Crossing, both fantastic. And actually, anybody I meet who's going to Afghanistan, I'm telling them now, like, you got to read this culturally, to understand what's going on the ground. It's so helpful. Such a great vignette.
Thank you.
Green on Blue. But I just wanted you to be able to share how people could find you and what you're working on now.
I'm a writer, so I write full-time. I write novels, I write nonfiction. My most recent book is a novel called Dark at the Crossing, which is it's the story of, it's set in the South Turkey along the Syrian border, and sort of the story of a failed revolution told through the prism of a failed marriage. So that book is out now, and then I also am a contributor to Esquire magazine, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and other places. And so you can find me on Twitter or at Elliot Ackerman or ElliotAckerman.com.
All right, perfect. I really appreciate the time. Maybe one day I'll hit you up for the second half of your
with pleasure. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Elliot.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.
I hope you enjoyed this combat story. If you want to tell your own story, go to combatstory.com. If you know someone we should interview, send me their info at ryan@combatstory.com. Hearing these stories can be tough or bring back your own memories. If you're battling PTSD, please call the Veteran Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255. 273-8255. Stay safe.